Maria stood at the edge of the village square, watching couples twirl beneath strings of paper lanterns. The music swelled, and laughter echoed off the cobblestones, but she remained in the shadows, her worn shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. At 28, she had learned to make herself invisible at gatherings like these. The whispers followed her everywhere, too heavy for grace, too plain for love. Her mother had died when she was young, leaving her father to raise her alone. He was a kind man, a carpenter who taught her to read and showed her the beauty in simple things. But he couldn't protect her from the cruelty of small minds. The other girls in the village had grown into swans, their waists cinched and their cheeks rosy. Maria had grown outward instead, her body soft and round, her features unremarkable. She learned early that the world had little patience for women who didn't fit its narrow molds. She had tried dancing once, years ago at a harvest festival. The young man who asked her did so on a dare, and she knew it even as she accepted. They lasted 3 steps before he stumbled, blamed her weight, and walked away to the jeers of his friends. The humiliation burned hotter than any physical pain. After that, she stopped attending dances altogether. She worked in her father's shop, kept house, and spent her evenings reading books borrowed from the traveling merchant who pitied her enough to lend them. The merchant was the only person who treated her with genuine kindness. Old Mr. Petrov would arrive every few months with his cart full of goods, and he always saved the best books for Maria. He told her stories of distant cities where people valued minds over appearances, where women could be scholars and artists. She treasured these tales but never quite believed them. They seemed as fantastical as the fairy stories in her books. Tonight, she had ventured out only because her father insisted. He worried about her isolation, though he never said so directly. So she came, stood in her usual spot, and tried to feel grateful for the music even if she couldn't participate. She was about to leave when a commotion arose near the fountain. A stranger had arrived in the village. He rode a fine black horse and wore clothes that marked him as gentry, though not ostentatiously wealthy. What made people stare wasn't his appearance but the large burlap sack he carried, which he handled with peculiar care. He dismounted in the square and began asking questions. He was looking for someone, he said. Someone who could read Latin and knew carpentry. Someone patient and clever. The villagers murmured among themselves. Latin. That was scholars' work. The priest knew some, and perhaps the schoolmaster, but they were busy men. Then someone, Maria never learned who, mentioned her name. She saw heads turn in her direction, and her stomach dropped. Before she could slip away, the stranger was walking toward her. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 35, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that seemed kind despite their intensity. He stopped a respectful distance away and bowed slightly. "Are you Maria, the carpenter's daughter?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I am. My name is Thomas Ashford. I'm a collector of old manuscripts, and I've damaged something precious. I was told you might be able to help." He gestured to the sack. "I need someone who can read the Latin inscriptions and repair the wooden case that houses it. I'm willing to pay well." Maria's heart raced. Work like this never came to her. "I could look at it," she said cautiously. "But I make no promises." He smiled, and it reached his eyes. "That's all I ask." They went to her father's workshop, and Thomas carefully removed the manuscript from its sack. It was an illuminated prayer book, centuries old, its wooden covers split and its brass hinges bent. The Latin text was beautiful, written in a careful hand, and decorated with gold leaf that still glimmered in the lamplight. Maria forgot her self-consciousness as she examined it. She ran her fingers over the damaged wood and studied the construction. "I can fix this," she said finally. "It will take time. The wood needs to be carefully rejoined, and the hinges will need to be replaced, but I can match the original style. And the text. Some pages are damaged." She looked closer. "I can read it well enough to determine what's missing. If you have materials for writing, I could reproduce the lost sections. My calligraphy isn't as fine as the original, but it would be functional." Thomas looked at her with something like wonder. "You'd do this? If you're willing to pay for the materials and my time, yes." They agreed on terms that made her father's eyes widen when he heard. Thomas took a room at the village inn and visited the workshop daily to check on progress. At first, Maria was nervous, conscious of his educated speech and refined manners. But Thomas never made her feel inferior. He asked her opinions, listened to her explanations, and shared his own knowledge freely. He told her about the libraries he'd visited, the manuscripts he'd collected, and the scholars he'd known. "You have a gift," he said one afternoon as she carefully reconstructed a damaged page. "Your Latin is better than many university students I've met." She flushed. "I taught myself from books. It's probably full of errors. It's thorough and thoughtful. That matters more than perfection." As the weeks passed, something shifted between them. Thomas began staying longer in the workshop, helping where he could, asking about her life. She found herself telling him things she'd never shared with anyone. Her love of learning, her loneliness, her dreams of seeing the world beyond the village. He listened without judgment or pity. One evening, as she was applying the final touches to the restored cover, Thomas said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I didn't come here by chance." Maria's hands stilled. "What do you mean?" "Mr. Petrov, the merchant. He's my uncle. He's been writing to me about you for years. He thought we might. That is, he believed we'd understand each other." Thomas stood and began pacing. "I'm not good at this. I've spent my life among books and manuscripts. I never married because I never met anyone who shared my interests, who could talk to me about ideas rather than dinner parties and social climbing. My family thinks I'm strange. And I've seen how the world treats those who don't conform." He stopped and looked at her directly. "Maria, I came here to meet you. The damaged manuscript was real, and I truly needed help, but I could have found a bookbinder in the city. I came because my uncle said you were brilliant and kind and wasted in this place." He was right. Maria felt tears prick her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't want to deceive you. And because I want to ask you something, but you deserve to know the truth first." He returned to the table and knelt beside her chair. From his pocket, he drew a small box. Inside was a simple gold ring. "I know this is sudden. I know I have no right to ask. But I've loved our conversations. I love how your face lights up when you talk about books. I love your careful hands and your quick mind. I have a house in the city, near the university. It has a library that needs cataloging and manuscripts that need care. I need a partner who can share that work with me, who wants to learn and discover and create. I need you." He paused, and his voice softened. "I've heard what they say about you here. That you're too fat to dance, too ugly to wed. They're fools. You're beautiful in ways they'll never understand. But more than that, you're extraordinary. And if you'll have me, I'd be honored to be your husband." Maria couldn't speak. Her whole life, she'd been told she wasn't enough. She believed it, had wrapped herself in that belief like armor against further hurt. Now this man, this stranger who'd become dear to her, was offering everything she'd dreamed of and never dared hope for. "I'm not a fairy tale princess," she whispered. "I don't want a fairy tale princess. I want a partner. An equal. I want you, Maria, exactly as you are." She looked at the ring, then at his face. She saw no deception there, no hidden mockery. Just hope and genuine affection. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime in shadow. "Yes, I'll marry you." Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her hand. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony. The villagers gossiped, of course, speculating about what he must be getting from the arrangement, but Maria no longer cared. She left the village without regret. In the city, she discovered a world transformed. Thomas's house was filled with books and curiosities. He introduced her to scholars and librarians who valued her knowledge. She learned new languages, studied ancient texts, and found her own voice in writing. She never became thin or conventionally beautiful, but she learned that those things mattered only to people whose opinions she didn't value. Years later, when Mr. Petrov visited them, he found Maria in the library, surrounded by manuscripts, happy and purposeful. He smiled his knowing smile and said, I told Thomas you were special. I'm glad you both finally saw it too. Maria hugged the old merchant who'd been the first to see past the sack of prejudice that her village had forced over her head. Thomas had removed it and found the treasure underneath. But more importantly, she had learned to remove it herself, to see her own worth regardless of others' narrow judgments. She never forgot the girl who stood in the shadows at village dances. But she no longer was that girl. She had become herself, fully and without apology, and that was the greatest transformation of all.